Hello and welcome to the book show on Diversity TV. I'm Ava Colaby, a writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. My Facebook and website are Ava Colaby Books. We're here in rural Arkansas in the United States, and I'm going to talk about three different adventure books, but they are real life stories. So the first book I want to talk about is called The Kontiki Expedition by Thor Heyerdahl. I don't have a copy of it because it is with my dear friend in Ireland that I borrowed it off of in the first place. It is a fantastic story. It is about a guy who had this theory that people thought was crazy. And his theory was that there were islands on the Pacific that had people inhabiting them because people had made balsa wood rafts and gone over on the Pacific Ocean to get to those islands. Everybody thought this was crazy and that it could not actually be done. So he argued with them, then he got tired of arguing with them. So instead, he got a bunch of friends together and they got a bunch of gear and they went down to South America, logged their own balsa wood logs, because ones that had been logged a while ago would be too dried out. You needed those sort of oils still in the wood so they would be able to last in the ocean water. They built their own raft and they went across the Pacific Ocean on this raft to demonstrate that it was possible. He's an ethnographer. I am not. I don't have a background in ethnography or archaeology. So I'm not going to argue about whether or not his theory was right because I know it's still heavily disputed. But the point is, number one, he proved that it was possible. And number two, he never gave up. Even though people thought it was insane and even though it was an incredible amount of work to pull off, he never gave up. To me, this is like a real life Indiana Jones kind of adventure. So he's arguing and being theoretical, and they are, and then he just goes out and does something that is in real life, and he makes it happen. It is an exciting read, and I highly recommend it. The next book that I want to talk about is called The Thrill of It. It is by Susan Wells, and it is about Amelia Earhart, the aviatrix. I don't have a copy of this book because I got it out of the award-winning Multnomah County, Portland, Oregon Public Libraries, which is a fantastic system. So I've read several different historical accounts on Amelia Earhart. I like this one the best, though I must say that with any historical account of female historical figures, I think we need to take them with a massive proverbial grain of salt, and here's why. I've noticed that in any case, when I'm researching and looking into female historical figures, Amelia Earhart, Calamity Jane, Mata Hari, Sacagawea, Empress Dowager Cixi from China, any of these women, their accomplishments are often downplayed, and people will make them not seem as credible as they were. Or in the case of Empress Dowager Cixi, whose accomplishments are indisputable, they try to vilify her. So rather than just telling you the story of what happened and what we do know, people are always trying to put their own spin on it. That's true of everything, but I've just noticed with female historical figures, they often try to downplay women's accomplishments. With Amelia Earhart, they talk about her as if she was just trying to be Lindbergh, or the fact that she wasn't very good at reading her instruments means we should discredit her entirely. And part of it is we have then people misinterpreting her and acting as if all she was an aviatrix. They're ignoring the fact that she went on nationwide campaigns, where I'm speaking tours is what I mean to say. And what she would be promoting is equality between the sexes, and she would go into schools and really encourage girls to believe that they could do all kinds of things. And in some ways, for her, that was more important than the flying. In some ways, the flying was a means to the social justice part of what she was doing, where she is getting these girls to believe in themselves. And a lot of these historical accounts like to ignore that she did all that work as a kind of a charitable thing, really, and how profoundly she was proving that gender equality was possible. And she did this without vilifying men. She got on very well with men. People forget how amazing it was for any woman to be doing this in the early 20th century. They also like to ignore things like her record-making flight to New Jersey one time, where she wasn't just doing a flight that a man had done before. She was making that record. She used to work as a social worker, helping women and children who were immigrants before she was a famous aviatrix. And in some ways, she considered herself a social worker who also flew. And she studied a lot of different subjects in schools and would excel at the different subjects. So anytime you look into a historical figure and you read about them, you need to look at the writer that wrote about them and what their personal biases may be, what their agenda may be. But even given that, in this book, we get a good historical account of Amelia Earhart's life and how much she was all about jumping into the next adventure and trying something even when she was afraid. She was never really fearless, and she said so. She said she would be afraid of things and she would do it anyway, and that was her courage. So she was an amazing pioneering person who used her position to help other people, which I also think is great. And that was a preoccupation of hers. She was freedom-loving and adventurous and got a lot out of the life she had, even though she did disappear, potentially die, long before anyone would have expected her. The next book that I want to recommend is called Hemingway on the China Front by Peter Moreira. I don't have a copy of this book because I got it out of the Dublin Public Library system in Dublin, Ireland, which is where I got most of the books about Hemingway and by Hemingway that I read a few years ago and was part of my bachelor's dissertation. Anyway, it is the story of when Ernest Hemingway and his then wife, Martha Gellhorn, that's wife number 3, went to war-torn China when China was having its civil war, and then Japan invaded on an undefended front, and they were having to handle that. So Hemingway and Gellhorn went there, and it was really her idea to go there. She wanted to go and see it. He was less interested. And as it turned out, he actually did some work as a spy for the United States government while he was there, which Gellhorn didn't even believe at the time, but other documents and evidence have come out since then to say he was doing spying work in China and later around Cuba when he had his fishing boat out there, the Pilar. I'm a big fan of Ernest Hemingway myself, wrote my bachelor's thesis on Hemingway and his portrayals of women. I think it needs to be said that a lot of people have said he was sexist, that he had certain opinions of women. What I was arguing in my thesis is that you have to put him in the context of the time period and compare him to men that were his contemporaries. And when you do that, he was actually more forward-thinking than the men of his time when it came to women. I also point out we don't really have to care what men think of us because it's not our job to care what people think of us. So Hemingway was a great adventurer in life. Not only did he go out and do things like drive an ambulance in World War I as a volunteer, go and see the Spanish Civil War. He was adventurous in his art. He was adventurous watching bullfights. He was an adventurous person in many ways and got a lot out of life by being adventurous like that. He had this persona of being a brusque man's man. I argued in my thesis that that may have been, to a large extent, a public persona that enabled him the freedom to write what he wanted to write, including writing about gay characters and other things that were extremely controversial and heavily censored in his time. But a lot of his male friends described him as being a more thoughtful, patient, and paternal person than his public persona would have said he was. So I think there's a chance he really built that up for its own purpose. A lot of his female characters are very independent and sexually independent even when they're not married, which was extremely controversial at the time and got him banned. But anyway, this persona protected him and how he wanted to write. And then there is Gellhorn, this famous female journalist. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of her as a person, though I haven't had the opportunity to read her work because it is not really readily available. It is hard to actually find a copy of it. So I haven't had the opportunity to read her work, and it's not really fair to have much of an opinion of her without that. I'm just not a big fan of her as a person. But even given that, in some ways, she was also a great adventurer in life. She was an amazing journalist in a time period when it was hard for women to get any independence. She went into all kinds of dangerous places, including covering the Spanish Civil War. She went to Germany after World War II, first journalist there, though she didn't get credit for it at the time because she was a woman. She was there when they were first liberating people from the concentration camps, and she was covering that. And of course, as this book covers, she was in China during that war. So she was an incredible woman of her time, and not just an incredible woman, but an incredible person and an incredible journalist. And she had some amazing firsts, not first for a woman, but firsts in general. And she got a lot out of life and used her life and her time to talk about people's stories. And she, I think, wanted to give a voice to a lot of people that did not have one. So the common theme with these three books is that life can be an adventure. And it is also about never giving up on your dreams. Whether it's Kontiki expedition and people think you're crazy for some theory you've come up with, or it's Amelia Earhart and people think it is your place to sit at home and be subservient to a man. Or if it is Hemingway and Gellhorn and you're going to do some wild, crazy thing, like go to a war-torn other country and write about what you experienced there, what you saw them going through. Life is an adventure to be had if you want to make it that, and go out there and have those experiences and never give up on your dreams, no matter how crazy other people think they are. You don't have to please other people. So those are my recommendations for today, and that is all I have for you now. Thank you for watching the book show on Diversity TV. We are happy to have you, and we will see you next time.